I'm going to do some questions from lesson 2 on simplifying. So the questions that I'll do are the ones that I have circled, 1, A, D, E, H, and I. And then I'll discuss question 3 and do one of the questions from question 3. Okay, reduce to lowest terms, stating the restrictions on the variable. The restriction on A is A cannot be equal to 0, right? That's if A is 0, then my entire denominator becomes 0. It's not 5a 0. What could you factor out of a 5a squared, or sorry, 5a cubed and 15a squared? You could factor out a 5a, and you would be left with, sorry, 5a squared. You could factor out the GCF. What you'd be left with is a minus 3. Okay, in my denominator, I would have 30a. And from this point, I could reduce. So 5 divided by 30, if you type that in on your calculator, what you would get is 1/6. 5 goes into 5 once, and it goes into 36 times. So that reduces to 1/6. I don't need to put the 1 in my denominator for now. Okay, actually I will, just so you could see it. So 1/6. A squared over A. So a to the 2 divided by a to the 1 is just a is left over. And then in the bracket, I have a minus 3. So that is my reduced to lowest terms. And then I state my restriction, which is a cannot be equal to 0. And you would be done. The only thing, again, I don't need, so I'm going to erase. I technically don't need that 1. I could have 1a/6 or just a times a minus 3/6. Let's do D. What can you factor out of a 4a minus 12? So you could factor out 4. You'd be left with a minus 3. This binomial is denominator. I'm going to put that in the bracket. I always like to think of binomials in brackets. I always like to put in a bracket. And then don't forget the negative here. So put that negative there. My restriction is a cannot be equal to 3. I've simplified. Now I just need to reduce. So I need to cross out what can be crossed out. A minus 3 over a minus 3 crosses out. And I'm left with negative 4 as my answer, comma, a cannot be equal. Okay, let's look at this one. Nothing I could do in the numerator. What could you factor out of the denominator? So in all of these questions, you're factoring. And you're either factoring by GCF, by difference of squares, PSA 1 or PSA 2. That's it. So this would be a GCF. So let's write the a squared in the numerator. And I'm actually going to take that negative and I'm just going to write it up there for now. In my denominator, I'm going to factor out an a, and I would have a plus 1. What I could reduce is this, a squared divided by a. And a squared divided by a, what I'm left with is 1a in the numerator. In my denominator, I have a minus 1, or sorry, a plus 1. The negative, I'm going to bring that, and I'm going to state my restrictions. A cannot be equal to, this a cannot be equal to 0. I'm going to put it, sorry, not equal to, and this a cannot be equal to negative 1. Okay, and that would be my final answer. Let's do H. So again, always ask yourself, how do I factor this? In the numerator, it is a difference of squares. 2 terms separated by a minus. Each of these terms could be square rooted. So what I have is I have negative, and then I've got my 2 factors that are my difference of squares. And my 2 factors would be the square root of 3a squared, 9a squared is 3a. And the square root of 1 is 1. 1 gets a positive and 1 gets a negative. Now, in my videos prior, I said, if ever you see something where they have the variable, like the constant first and the variable second, rewrite this. Write that variable first and then the constant. So I'm going to rewrite this as negative 3a plus 1. Okay, so that's your first step. If ever they do that, they're trying to just sort of throw you off. Now, nothing cancels yet because these are all 3a's and this is a negative 3a. So then in a previous video, I had told you if you ever start with a negative, you could factor out that negative. So right off the side, negative 3a plus 1. If I factor out a negative 1, what I'm going to be left with is 3a minus. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite this entire thing, but I'm going to factor out that negative 1. So I'd be left with in my numerator negative 3a plus 1, 3a minus 1. In my denominator, I now have negative that I factored out and 3a minus 1. Okay, so let's see what we could cancel. 3a minus 1, 3a minus 1 cancels. And here, this negative is really a negative 1. So negative 1 divided by negative 1 cancels. It becomes positive 1, so that cancels. And what I'm left with is 3a plus 1. I'll write that down here. 3a plus 1, comma, I need to state what my restriction is. And my restriction, this could not be equal to 0, so a cannot be equal to 1/3. And that would be my answer for that question. So pause if you need to. I'm going to erase this though, and we're going to do 1i together. Okay, so 1i, I'm looking at the numerator and I'm saying to myself, I could factor a GCF out of this. I could take out a GCF of 2b. So write that down. 2b comes out, and then I would be left with b, what would I be left with? B minus 9 all over b. And what I hope that you're seeing with this is that b minus 9 I could write twice. So b minus 9, b minus 9. Everything is now completely factored, so see what you could cancel. A b minus 9 and a b minus 9 would cancel. A b and a b would cancel. What I'd be left with in my numerator, I only have a 2 left there. In my denominator, the only thing I have left is a b minus 9. That is fully simplified. Now I just need to state what my non-permissible values were, what b cannot be equal to. So this b here cannot be 0, okay? Because think about it. If I put a 0 in here, anything times 0 would make my entire denominator 0. These two have the same non-permissible, which is 9. I only need to write that once. And that would be my answer. Okay, let's quickly look at number 3. I don't want to solve number 3. I'll just sort of tell you how you would solve it. So this numerator would be PSH. And you would be looking for what gives you a product of negative 12 times 3. So that would be negative 36. And what gives you a sum of negative 5. Remember for PSA2, it's decomposition. Okay, so the numerator you would do PSA2, and the denominator you would factor out a 2t, and you would get t minus t. And just to let you know, like I want you to pause the video, see if you could factor that numerator. So see if you could do it correctly. If you did it correctly, your answer should be this. Your two factors for PSA2 would be t minus 3 and 3t plus 4. Right? So that And then when you cancel, equal to. When you cancel, t minus 2 and t minus 3 would cancel. So I'm left with that factor in my numerator. So 3t plus 4 all over 2t. That would be my solution. And then my non-permissibles, t not equal to. That t cannot be equal to 0. And this t cannot be equal to 3. Okay? For B, what would you do? GCF. So look at this for a minute and say to yourself, what can you factor out? Pause the video. What's the GCF of these two? Okay, so the GCF is a 2. And what you'd be left with is 16 minus a squared. In my denominator, it's going to be a PSA question, but before you PSA this, can you take out a GCF? So think back to Math 10C. Before we PSA, we always ask if we could take out a GCF. The answer is yes. We could take out a GCF of 2 to give us a squared plus 2a minus 8. Okay, this would be a PSA 1 question. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to erase down here. And let's do the denominator first. So what gives you a product of -8 and a sum of 2? Right? Product of -8 and a sum of 2. And your answer, if you factor that correctly, will be a plus 4 and a minus 2. Right? So the answer was 4 and -2. Those two multiplied together would give you -8 as a product, and 4 plus -2 would give you a sum of 2. Then in my numerator, I've got that 2. And look at this 16 minus a squared. This is not completely factored. So what you just have to see is that this is a difference of squares. And this is a difference of squares would be 4 minus a and 4 plus a. That would be the difference of squares. What can I cancel? 2 over 2 cancels. What else cancels? A plus 4. And if I wrote this the other way, remember I said always write your variable first. This would be a plus 4. So a plus 4 and a plus 4 would cancel. And what I would be left with is I would be left with 4 minus a. If this was a test question, I'd be completely okay if you wrote 4 minus a. I would actually even prefer if you wrote -8 plus 4. Right? Because I always put my variable first. And then the denominator would be a minus 2. And my non-permissibles, so let's figure out what those guys were. This a cannot be equal to 2. And this a cannot be equal to -4. So there would be my answer for B. Okay, for C, what would you guys GCF out of here? A 4. And you get 1 minus x squared. Before you start saying, what do I do here? You've got an 8, an 8, and a 16. So I could take it to a GCF of 8. And I've got an x cubed, x squared, and an x. The GCF for this guy is an 8x. What you'd be left with is x squared plus 1, plus 1x, sorry, minus 2. Okay, we're not done. What does 4 over 8 reduce to? 4 over 8 is the same thing as 1 over 2, right? If you type in 4 over 8 on your calculator, you're going to get 1 over 2. And then I'm going to bring down that x. Now, 1 minus x squared, that is a difference of squares. They love giving difference of squares. 2 terms separated by a minus. Each of those terms could be square rooted. So this would be 1 minus x and 1 plus x. This is a PSA 1 question. What gives you a product of -2 and a sum of 1? And if you factor that correctly, you'll get x plus 2 and x minus 1. Okay, from here, let's get our non-permissibles. This x can't be 0, this x can't be -2, and this x can't be 1. So there's my non-permissibles. Stuff will always, always cancel. So if something doesn't cancel, we're not completely done. And the issue are these guys here. Remember I said always rewrite so that your variable is first, okay? So I'm going to rewrite those numerators. I'm not going to bother putting that 1 there. I don't need that 1, but I'm going to rewrite this guy as -x plus 1. And I'm going to write this guy as x plus 1. All over 2x, x plus 2, x minus 1. So I still can't cancel anything, right? Here's a clue. You guys, I am going to be putting this on your exam. If ever you start with a negative x, you factor out a -1. So what this factor here is -x plus 1. What I need you to see is that that is a -1, and you could factor out a -1. And what I would be left with, the -1 goes in front of the bracket and the answer goes in the bracket. So I would be left with x minus 1. So let's rewrite this -x plus 1. That is the same thing as -1, x minus 1, what I just did, right? And then I have this factor x plus 1. So I need to include that. In my denominator, I have 2x, x plus 2, and x minus 1. Okay, I did all that work, and they're only letting me cancel one thing. But that's okay. They are going to let me cancel this and this. We'll cancel. So now my solution is -1, x plus 1, 2x, x plus 2. I'm going to state my non-permissibles. X cannot be equal to. We said that that guy was 0, that guy was -2, and this guy was 1. This is how I would prefer you to give me your answer on your test when we're done rationals. Your book, though, what your book does, and I don't know why they do this because everything else they give their answers in completely factored form, your book redistributes in this -1. So your book says the answer is -1 x minus 1 all over 2x, x plus 2. This is how your book gives the answer. I would accept this on a test. However, the answer, they really want it in completely factored form, which would be this guy. Okay, so I would argue that this is even more correct.